Well, unfortunately, as Lisa mentioned, I'm not going to be able to unpack Hebrews today. We're going to draw upon Hebrews, but really we're starting a series on Hollywood called Hollywood Religion, and so it's a topical sermon today. We're going to talk a lot about the film industry, the TV industry, how Hollywood presents world views, messages to us, and we're going to draw upon the scripture of Hebrews and look at this, how that defines who Christ is for us in Hebrews. And I don't think we've got another, I'd love to preach another 30 minutes and we can unpack the rest of Hebrews if you guys want to stay here, but maybe we could do a little study afterwards. But anyway, the one thing, so we're getting into this, and so I think part of the idea of this is each fall we do a series. We did religion and politics, we've done religion and science. Last year we did the new atheism that's impacting our culture. One of the things that shapes our culture every day, every week is the film industry, TV, Hollywood. That shapes our culture. It's a cultural phenomenon that impacts us as we follow God, and in ways that we're aware of and ways that we're not aware of. And we're going to talk about that this morning. Now, I'm going to illustrate this starting off to show you give you a couple examples of how Hollywood film, TV has impacted you, all right, and who you are and how you speak, all right? So, for example, how many people have seen the TV sitcom Seinfeld, right? You've seen Seinfeld. How many of you have said one of these things, all right, these phrases? How about this? Have you ever used a phrase, not that there's anything wrong with that, right? Multiple Seinfeld episodes, they would say, the multiple characters, multiple episodes, they would go on to give an opinion about something, and then they would qualify that opinion with, not that there's anything wrong with that, right? Not that I'm judging, not that I'm, so that's kind of the thing. And so I've noticed that phrase has gotten more, we hear that phrase more often in our language. How many people have ever used this phrase, yada, yada, yada? Right? We weren't using it before Seinfeld, but we're using it today a lot. Or maybe it's gone out of vogue, I don't know. How about this one? This is my favorite one for my kids. No soup for you. When they're acting up at the table, no soup for you. Get out of here, right? So that's from a Seinfeld episode. How about this? And I can never say this right because I can't get the George Costanza thing down. But George would always say in different plays, when he was like down and, he was like, because always something bad was happening to George, and George would get down, and then something good would happen, and he'd say, I'm back, baby. That's what he would say, I'm back, baby. Have you ever said that phrase, I'm back, baby? Or baby, I'm back, or, anything of that nature? Or how many people have referred to someone else as a double dipper? Right? That's where you take a chip, you put it in the dip, you eat it, and then you put the same chip back in, contaminating the dip. Come on, right? You double dippers out there. All those of us with OCD need your help, come on. So, and then also close talker, right? How many people have referred to somebody as they're a close talker, they get right in your personal space, right? And so everybody's got that personal space distance. So that's one of the ways that a TV sitcom has influenced our culture, has influenced our vocabulary, has influenced the way we talk to each other and how we share things with each other. Now think about this. Here's another thing. We've also been educated by TV and film. And a good example of that, an easy example of that is when you get arrested, how many phone calls do you get? One, right? Standard answer. It's not the truth. In fact, you may not get any phone calls when you get arrested. It depends on the nature of the crime, depends on the nature of the situation. They may not allow you to talk to anybody because they're doing an investigation or what have you. You may get to make 2 phone calls, 3 phone calls. You may not get to make any phone calls. You don't have a right to a phone call when you're arrested. And so that's part of it. But the reason we believe that, you notice how everybody said one phone call? Because we've all watched TV. We've all watched film, and that's the standard storyline. That's how the script writers write it and everything, because they don't want to have to explain all the Miranda rights, so they say, they'll just give them one phone call, right? So we've bought it. We believe that is the truth about the way things work, and it's not true. And so that's a great example, a very easy example of how we have even been educated by the film industry, by Hollywood. So here's a great question that Grant Horner brings up in his book called Meaning at the Movies. He asks this question. I think it's a great question for us to ask. How many times have you walked away from a film unaware that you have bought into subtle philosophies and worldview positions that could undermine your faith? Good question. I want you to think about the one phone call rule. Now, we all said one phone call. If we had only seen that in one sitcom, we probably wouldn't have said that. But because we've heard it repeated over and over again over a period of time, we've become to believe it's true. There are other philosophies and worldviews that Hollywood is repeating over and over and over again to us in film, in TVs, in sitcoms that we buy into as well, not just the one phone call rule. And it's evolved over time, and we have to be aware that when we hear things repeatedly and we're fed things repeatedly, then we start to believe it. And that's part of that. And that's part of why we have to have a mind of discernment when we watch TV, when we go to the movies. Now, one of the things that's so powerful about film and TV is that whoever's the writers, the producers, are trying to tell a story in some way. But it's an edited story. It's a framed story. Think about when you go into the movie theater, everything's framed, they turn out the lights, it's got a curtain around the screen, and you're immersed into that story. And in fact, that's what we want. That's what we're hoping for. We want to be entertained. And so we're immersing ourselves into that story, and we want that story to entertain us. And yet we're not always thinking about the power of the editing. In fact, my doctoral dissertation was on multisensory worship, and so I did a lot of research on the use of media in worship, the use of media in our culture, and how that impacts us and affects us. And there's lots of material written about it and people warning us about it from the 1960s, that there were concerns about how this medium was being used. Because what producers are now doing is they're studying our neuroscience and brain and the way our brain works, and they're trying to figure out ways to elicit certain emotions from us. And when you take an emotion and an image and you put it together and present it to somebody, it's a much more powerful communication tool than what I'm doing right now. And they spend millions and millions of dollars to put that story, that philosophy, that worldview out there for you, and it's not always a Christian worldview. It's not always a God-centered worldview. But they spend millions of dollars to do it. They use computer graphics and all this stuff. I, as a preacher, cannot compete with that. One, I don't have millions of dollars and a couple years. But I'll tell you this. Let me make this deal with you. If you give me millions of dollars and give me 2 years to prepare a sermon, I'll come up with a great sermon. Right? It'll be film. It'll be edit. I mean, we'll do the whole thing. Right? I have to work every week. I do it every week, right? And so, but what hopefully we're offering you, and notice that you don't have to pay a ticket to get in here, do you? And that's on purpose. Because God's message is free. We don't charge people for God's grace. And so that's part of what we're offering people is a relationship with God, God's grace, and yet we're also in competition. A lot of people think we're in competition with other churches. We're not in competition with other churches. We're in competition with the world. We're in competition with the movie theaters, the Starbucks, the soccer fields, the baseball field. That's our competition as a church, really. It's not other churches. We're all part of the kingdom of God and helping people know God's grace. So that's part of what we do in the church. But we're trained to watch movies in a certain way, and it's a powerful medium to communicate messages. And sometimes we don't always know the message. We're not even aware of the message that we're being given. And I'm going to give you an example of that from one of my favorite films this morning. One of my favorite films was the Matrix trilogy. Anybody seen the Matrix, right? Right. And so it's a great, I was like, this is cool, when I first saw it and I went through it. And I still think it's a great story because there's a lot in the story that we think about. So here's the thing about the Matrix. You also notice that there's a lot of religious symbolism in the Matrix. If you've ever seen the Matrix, there's religious symbolism used throughout the movies. And multiple religions. And so, for example, Neo, which means new man, or it's also a reference to Adam in Genesis. And what does Neo have early on in the first movie? He's reborn. He has a born-again experience. And so they use that as a symbol. If you look at the elevator, when they go down to the bar in the elevator, if you've seen the movie, press the help button. And the help button, the P is scratched out, so it's spelled H-E-L, right? And then they go down, right? So that's one of the things. I think my battery went out, Jim. No, I'm good? Okay. So that's the thing. Morpheus, who we're actually going to see a scene between Neo and Morpheus. Morpheus is the Greek god of dreams. That's the name of the Greek god of dreams. And what he's offering Neo is to come out of that dream state and into reality. What's Neo's girlfriend's name? Those of you who've seen the movie. Trinity, right. Is that a religious symbol? Is that a religious word, right? And so you can see all those things throughout the movie. So what I want you, though, to listen for, so that's it. You know, I love the story. I bought all the DVDs. But what I want you, as we watch this clip between Neo and Morpheus, it's the famous scene. Are you going to take the red pill? You're going to take the blue pill, right? It's a famous scene that most people are aware of, or at least even if you haven't seen the movie, you may have heard, this phrase used. We're going to take a look at this scene again, but I want you to listen to it discerning something, all right? I don't want you just to be entertained. I want you to actually use your critical thinking skills right now. And I want to ask this question. What is the subtle assumption about church that's communicated? What's the subtle assumption communicated about church? Let's take a look at the clip. So what was the assumption about church that you heard? What's that? It shields us from the truth. It's blinding us from the truth, right? Did anybody else hear anything else? Makes us slaves. Propaganda, right? I notice how the writer subtly phrases those lines, that the matrix is work, church, taxes. Right? Work, those are all put together. Did you notice that? And that's intentional. It says, and he goes on, he says, it's the world pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth that you are a slave, Neo. So, and in this point in the film, if you've watched the film, this is where I was there. I'm identifying with, we've identified at this point in the movie with Neo. We're identifying with that character, and then we're being offered the truth. So we're we're in the movie at that point, and we're connected to that character. And then we're saying, okay, yeah, what pill do we want him to take, right? We know, right? Notice that when he's offered the other pill, the blue pill to go back, it says, and then you can believe whatever you want to believe, right? And so this offering, like belief is a bad thing. Like you can go, belief is this bad thing that we have. And so really what most people may not know, what you may not actually know this morning, is that the Wachowski brothers who produced the films were the sons of a hardcore atheist. And if you follow the whole series, you'll see that there's an atheistic message throughout the film. And the message is religion is bad. The matrix is bad, and the matrix is religion, the system, religion, taxes, work. We're enslaved to it. We're imprisoned to it. And the only truth and the reality is to choose to get out of it. That's an atheistic message. And so we've been subtly given a message, and as we're being entertained, we're actually being offered a message. And if you hear that message over and over and over again, what's going to happen to your belief system? What's going to happen to your worldview? See what I'm saying? So there may come a day, and maybe I'll be a little prophetic here at this moment and say 10, 20 years from now, well, we have less of a belief as a society in God than we do today. We've already seen it changing over the past 20 years. Will it continue to change? And the other thing that's not helping us is terrorism, right? That's what we're seeing in the news. We just remembered September 11th this week, and that's a great way to point, see, religion is bad. There is bad religion, but religion is not bad. Does that make sense? There are people who practice bad religion, but that doesn't mean religion is bad. We have to think with critical thinking skills. We have to discern. We have to think. We have to be aware of what's going on. So this is the thing about film, is that we have to be aware of. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the difference between Christian faith and superheroes, or in this particular case, we're going to use Neo as the hero. Neo is the hero of the Matrix. But have you noticed that when you go see a superhero movie, there's actually pretty much followed a plot line or a storyline that's pretty consistent between all superhero movies, whether it's Batman or Spider-Man or Captain America. And so all these movies have like a series of things that are happening. And one of the things I also know that's pointed out is, did you notice that many of them are orphans? Well, what's the purpose of the orphan, idea? The idea is to get us to connect, to empathize with that character, to see that, to see ourselves in that character and start to identify with that character. So that's, I think, part of the character development that goes on in films that is happening with superheroes. So every superhero has a goal in the movie or in the story. There's a goal. There's some desire that's driving that hero. Now, the Christian faith, our hero is Jesus, right? And so Jesus is, we have a story of a hero, and our hero is Jesus. Now, Jesus' goal, as we heard in Hebrews, repeated a couple times in Hebrews, actually 3 times, God's will is mentioned. Jesus' goal was to do God's will. That was Jesus' role and goal. Neo's goal in the movies in the Matrix movie is to rebel against the architect, to get free from the Matrix. That's the goal of the hero. And the architect in the movie is a godlike figure within the movie. And if you ever go watch it, I think the architect represents God to a certain degree. The other thing, every hero has an adversary, right? Batman has a mortal enemy, right? Neo in the Matrix in the Matrix movies. Neo, who is Neo's nemesis? Neo's adversary. It's an agent, right? Special Agent Smith, right? And a couple other agents. Who's Jesus' adversary? The devil, evil, sin, death, those things. Every hero most heroes always have a character flaw. So Neo has a character flaw. His character flaw is that he doesn't know what the truth is, and he has to make a decision. He has to make a choice, and he has to figure out, what the Matrix is and how to get unstuck from the Matrix, and he's learning to choose his own destiny versus the architect's destiny for his life, right? And so that's what he's trying to figure out. What's Jesus' character flaw? Trick question, by the way. Doesn't have one, right? One of the things that we read about in Hebrews is that Jesus was the perfect sacrifice without blemish, that he was a sacrifice once and for all humanity, for the whole world, and that he was perfect and without blemish, spotless, and that's the offering of God, God's Son. Then there's always an apparent defeat, and so because the superhero always has some defeat or apparent defeat because they haven't figured out their character flaw yet, and so that apparent defeat is for Neo, his apparent defeat. He gets stuck in a subway station in the second part of the trilogy, and he's stuck in the Matrix in the subway station, and he can't get out. And you think that, that we're doomed. It's never going to come. People are never going to be freed. For Jesus, an apparent defeat was, the crucifixion, right? That he was crucified. They thought, well, this is it, final, and then, it's over, right? The disciples are walking away. And then also you always have a final confrontation where they defeat their adversary. Neo eventually faces Agent Smith in the end, and he uses the power of his own choice to defeat Agent Smith. So he ends up sacrificing himself to free people from the Matrix and do that. Jesus sacrificed himself for our sins and to free us from sin and death, but he has the final victory in the resurrection. And then there's some self-revelation that the hero comes to in the end of a movie where they kind of they realize their character flaw and they learn from it and grow from it, which is what we identify with. We have to remember that the difference is Jesus was God's revelation to us. This was God communicating God's love to us. This was God communicating to us His will. And His will, God's will, was for us to be in relationship with God and to live for God and to also do God's will just like Jesus did God's will. And so one of the things that the Matrix movie and other movies play with, the whole idea behind the Matrix is you've got to get out, you've got to exercise your own will, you need to rebel against the system and choose your own destiny. It's about your will. And I would suggest to you that was the same temptation in the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve. Don't you want to be like God? That's what the serpent said. And in the movie Matrix, Neo becomes God in a lot of ways. And so what I'm suggesting to you is what entertainment does, what we're entertaining is us, our desires, what we want to do, right? A lot of entertainment is entertaining what our desires. And so we say, entertain me. You know, we trade our faith in sometimes for a large popcorn and a soda and say, entertain me. And part of that entertainment is entertaining more of our base nature. And if you've noticed in the film industry over time, at least, you know, this is showing my old age, but things become more and more appealing to our baser and baser natures. It's got to because what's happening in the film industry is they're having to up the bar. Well, we've already blown somebody into 4 pieces, now we've got to blow somebody into 5 pieces. You see what I'm saying? And so because of that entertainment and that need to entertain, they have to keep upping the ante and making it more and more base appeal to our baser natures. And that's part of entertainment. So in a sense, what I'm suggesting is we ask for it. And there's a great debate, an argument about, you know, so if we go to Hollywood and say, hey guys, stop making these films that, you know, are appealing to our base nature, they would say, well, you guys are asking for it. And then we say, well, not, you know, and so we have that debate all day long, right? But that's part of what's happening is that we keep doing that because it's about entertaining ourselves and our nature. Whereas Jesus came to free us from that nature. That the matrix that we're in is our sin nature, our base nature, and to free us from that. If you still don't believe me, you may still not believe me. I want to suggest to you that this does influence us. Film does influence us. When Braveheart came out, the interest in Scottish history rose significantly. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to know, am I related to William Wallace? And they began to study Scottish history. When the movie Top Gun came out, naval aviation recruitment went up 500% after that movie, right? I remember my roommate in college, he is a Navy pilot, and but I remember him, you know, going to become, you know, I'm going to become a Navy pilot. I'm like, you've been watching too much Top Gun, but that was one of his favorite movies, you know. Think about how I think the Da Vinci Code has actually raised all this, like people now are saying, well, you know, I get questions all the time about these conspiracy theories in church history, and it's like, that is so far from the fact. It's it's fiction. We forget it's fiction. But I know people asking questions about it, and it's really not based on anything in reality. The other thing is, how about Jaws in the 70s, right? What people don't always, the connections are there is that Jaws was actually led to almost the extinction of sharks. And so because people started hunting sharks after seeing Jaws, like, we got to get rid of these animals, you know, they're killers. That then led to research, money being funded into research, shark research, right? And so shark research went up to learn more about shark behavior, and now we've got Shark Week, right? So let's see how that works. Now, on a more serious note, and it's a more tragic note, you know, we can look at, you know, the guy that went in the movie theater and killed people, you know, after, you know, the Batman movie, when the Batman movie came out. Or closer to home for me, several years ago, I did a funeral for a 14-year-old young man. And I won't go into the details of his death, but he died. He accidentally killed himself trying to get high using inhalants. And I was there the evening, I was with his parents that evening, and when they wheeled his body out of their house. And I remember something the dad said that struck me. He says, we just watched that on CSI last week. We just saw that on CSI. There was no evidence previous to that moment that he was doing this. The seed from watching CSI, this idea was planted in him. Now, I don't think the writers of CSI sat down and said, let's make an episode that will lead to this 14-year-old's death. I don't think they think that. They're thinking what? How do we entertain, right? That's their intention. But what's happening as we keep upping the ante is that we're pushing envelopes and we're pushing boundaries. And so a seed was planted in this young man's life, a 14-year-old's life, right? Now, he nurtured that seed. It was his choice. It was his actions, his behaviors. It wasn't caused by CSI. Let's get that correct. But the seed was planted. The seed was planted. and He nurtured it. And I think about that, and here's what I really, not really what I want to say, but part of what I want us to be aware of, especially parents. A 14-year-old is not fully developed with critical thinking skills, with the ability to discern. A 14-year-old is not emotionally mature enough to see some things on TV or to see some things in the movies. Because the way we develop as people, our thinking, our ability to do that is only reached when we reach adulthood. Now, I know some 30-year-olds that still are 14, right? I know some of us are still there, and we shouldn't be watching this stuff, right? Because we're not thinking it. So the point is not that we're bad parents if we, let our kids see something or we don't control it. I'm not saying go do that. I'm saying be aware that not everything that we expose our youth to is good for them. If it's not good for us, some of it's not good for us, even as adults. So we have to be discerning. We have to think about what messages we're opening ourselves to. What are the repeated messages over and over again that we're opening ourselves to when we open ourselves to be entertained? How are we going to know the difference between God's will and the will of the Wachowski brothers or another producer, another writer, another director? How are we going to know the difference? How are we going to know what to discern? How are we going to know what the truth is? And Jesus said He was the truth that would set you free. Not from the matrix, but from sin. The only way for us to know God's will is to learn about it, to read it, to know it, right? Because then when I go watch a movie, if I know what's in here, I can watch a movie and go, I don't think that's in line with God's view of the world. I don't think that's in line with my Christian faith. Or if I don't read this, if I don't know this, if I don't do that, then what's shaping my belief? What's shaping my assumptions about the world? What's shaping the way I see things? And I would suggest to you that if we're not reading this, there's something else shaping it. And I think what's shaping it is film and TV. Probably more than you and I are aware of or even think about or will even admit. So you can take the blue pill or you can take the red pill. All I'm offering is the truth. God's word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. What light are you using? Amen.